Simply diversifying your repertoire is not culturally responsive. See, it's not about diversity when we're talking about culturally responsive teaching, because sure, we can program a Black, Brown, Indigenous, or Asian composer's music on our concert. We can teach a pop song or a hip hop song, but none of that is actually going to help our learners learn better. But you know what does? It's increasing learner capacity for higher order thinking skills and critical thinking. And that's what culturally responsive teaching aims to do. So in our music context, culturally responsive music teaching, it's not about diversifying our repertoire. It's about leveraging the cultural frames of reference of our young musicians in order to partner with them through the learning and artistic process and engage them in relevant real world contexts of music making that allows them to develop skills for both inside and outside the music classroom. See, teaching music, it's actually not about teaching music. It's not about the notes on the page. It's not about the fingerings on an instrument. Teaching music, or should I say, high quality music teaching, it's about who our young learners become because of engaging in the artistic process of learning about and learning to engage and perform in music. And in this way, it's not about the diversity of the repertoire that we choose. It's about how are we choosing repertoire through a culturally responsive lens so that that repertoire is best positioned to support culturally responsive teaching and learning. And in tonight's session, I'm going to break down for you my framework for selecting diverse repertoire through a culturally responsive lens so that you can be better prepared for how to really choose repertoire that's diverse and not just for a multicultural education. Thank you so much for joining me tonight for session 3 of my 4-part series, Making Culturally Responsive Music Teaching the Norm and Not the Exception. If you are just joining, let me know that you're here. Let me know that you're tuning in. I can see you've got several people here watching, but of course I can't always tell who you are. So drop your name in the comments, drop where you're tuning in from. Would love for this to continue to be a conversation. In case this happens to be your very first time joining me for one of these live sessions, let me make sure I introduce myself. My name is Ashley Cuthbertson. I use the pronouns she and her, and I am a former pre-K through 12 music educator and adjunct professor, and now the very, very proud CEO and founder of A. Cuthbertson Consulting. We're a national educational consulting firm on a mission. My team and I are on a mission to shift the landscape of music education, making equitable, culturally responsive instructional practices just what we do as a field and no longer an extra, an optional thing, or that thing you do when you have time. Because what I know is that when we all shift our practices for equity and cultural responsiveness, not only will more students just have access to music coursework, but more students will have access to high quality music instruction in the courses that they are taking. And so this is the work that I'm very privileged to do with music educators all across the country. We just celebrated our 2-year anniversary in June, and in just 2 short years, we have partnered with 22 organizations, not including actually it's closer to 40 myself before I did this full time. So quite a lot of organizations, schools, and districts that we have partnered with. And I'm so proud that over 3,700 music teachers have been a part of the different speaking engagements that I've done at conferences, the professional development programs that I've done for different organizations, my instructional coaching programs, curriculum development, all kinds of things. And those 3,700 plus music educators represent 1.1 million students. And what I know is that we're just getting started. And so I'm so excited for this particular series, this 4-part series, where I'm breaking down my framework for culturally responsive music education. This framework is actually what I created about 2.5, 3 years ago as the blueprint, right? So how can I make it concrete for music educators and arts educators too, for how do we actually do this thing called culturally responsive teaching, and how do we make it equitable for our students? More and more music and arts teachers know that in order to keep up with the diverse and ever-evolving needs of our learners, we can't keep doing these old methods of teaching music, teaching the arts, right? But then the question becomes, how? What are the steps, right? So I created this framework, which essentially is the standards, I like to say, for our work, because whether I'm doing a curriculum development project, whether I'm advising a school or a district, whether I'm doing an instructional coaching session with a teacher or delivering professional development, whether I'm doing a speaking engagement, everything goes back to these four main pillars, which is what these four sessions are all about. So if you didn't catch the replay or join me live for session one, we jumped all the way into the first part of my framework, which I find is really the pivotal part. You know, teachers often come to me, school districts, fine arts supervisors, I've had lots of conversations as we get ready for back to school about bringing my work to more folks. Always are curious about, well, really what we're going to talk about tonight, which is the repertoire piece. How do we make it more diverse? How do we deliver the culturally relevant curriculum and instruction? But really what I found is the first step has to be is what session one was all about. How do you develop a lens for equity such that you can see where the obstacles and barriers are lying, not just in the learning environment, but also in your curriculum and instruction, and also within you and me, right? Because sometimes we actually are the barrier for our students. The first part of my framework is the tough work, I like to say, because it's the self work. It's the work of holding the mirror up to yourself and really getting in there and unearthing your values, your beliefs, and where they come from, and what ways are they affecting your teaching choices, because they are, whether you know it or not. So if you did not check that out, or if you didn't join me live, make sure you go back to session one, developing a mindset for equity in music education, because that's how we start the critical mindset and thinking shifts, so that when we get to the repertoire and the curriculum instructional piece, you know how to make those decisions for yourself and for your program. And then last week I went live for session two, which was all about creating affirming music learning environments, not just welcoming our students, right, but really helping students to have a sense of belonging such that they have ownership and personal responsibility over the music learning space. And that really starts with the music educator not just knowing their students, but understanding their students. That means you got to get away from the surface level questions like, what are they interested in? What kind of music do they like? That's very surface. We got to go deeper than that to understand our learners' values, their beliefs, their motivations, so that we know how to make the instruction responsive to them, right? That's the responsive part of culturally responsive teaching. So really the first two sessions are the foundation. The first two parts of my framework, that's the foundation, because it sets the tone for the mindset shifts that the leader in the classroom has to make. That's the music educator. And then it sets the tone for creating the conditions necessary in the learning environment. And then we get into choosing repertoire, curriculum, and instruction, which is what we're going to do tonight and next week's session. So thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for those of you who are watching the replay. If you're watching the replay, make sure you drop hashtag replay in the comments. That way I know that you were with me in the replay and watching and engaging in this. This looks just like free professional development that I'm popping on and doing. And all of these will be available on my social media channels and YouTube channel. I don't know if I'm going to leave them up or not. We'll see. But for now, they're up there for anyone to have access to. So tonight, what we're getting into is the piece that everybody's always curious about. And if you've been following me for any length of time, you have heard me say, simply diversifying your repertoire is not culturally responsive. In fact, sometimes I'm a little resistant to talk about the repertoire piece because I know that that's the biggest misconception, the biggest barrier really that I have to overcome with the teachers that I work with. And so I purposely leave this until later because often we don't want to do the work that's necessary so that we can really engage in this piece. But it also, part of a culturally responsive approach is that we are providing mirrors and windows for our students. So not just our students of color, they need a mirror, but also even our white students, right? I love this quote from Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, and I don't remember word for word, so I won't say the whole thing, but the gist of this quote from Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, who of course is the originator of the term culturally relevant pedagogy, she said, white students shouldn't go out into a very, global society not having any sort of concept of understanding like cultural proficiency, right? It doesn't set them up for success either. And so when we think about our repertoire choices, it's a really great way for us to provide some of those mirrors and reflections for all of our different students, right? All of the different various multifaceted identities they have. They're not just the color of their skin, right? But it also provides a window, an opportunity for students to learn about people different from them. And then it provides a sliding glass door, right? An opportunity for you not just to be a tourist in somebody else's experience, but to really start to understand what that experience could feel like. And so tonight, what I really want to get into is three main points, or the three main kind of, the framework basically is a framework and a framework, right? There's the big framework that is these four main anchors, but then there's kind of like frameworks within it. And I really want to break this down. The teachers that I first worked with this framework were the teachers that I worked with when I was an adjunct professor, was teaching graduate music education courses and pedagogy, because that's really my jam is the pedagogy piece, right? The instructional delivery piece, the curriculum development piece. And so I first developed this framework for those teachers as a clear roadmap for how do you select repertoire and materials, that when you get to the curriculum design piece, you have materials that are rich already, that provides you easy connections to really make for a culturally responsive experience where we can more easily expand the learning capacity of our students, right? To really help them develop those higher order thinking skills, to be able to develop those critical thinking skills, communication skills, all that great stuff, right? So I really want to break down kind of the three main parts. And so when we're thinking about selecting repertoire through a culturally responsive lens, which really that's what this is. It's not about diversity, because again, diversity doesn't help our kids learn. It's about how do we use the lens of cultural responsiveness for when we're going to get to the instruction. How can we already have that in our lens, our pathway, our view, for when we're picking material, because some material is going to be better suited for this kind of teaching and learning than others. And so the first thing we have to do is when we're looking at a piece of music, we're just evaluating, will this be a useful piece of music for my students or not, is we have to look for the story in the song, right? How can I find what the story of this is? Often I find music teachers, we get so focused on the skill and the concept, which is very basic. It's very small thinking, when you're only thinking about, I got to teach the half note, or my woodwinds need to learn trills, so here's a great piece for them to practice their trills, right? That's very small thinking, and it's very focused on just the mechanics of music. But remember, I said teaching music isn't really about teaching music, right? It's who our students become. So we have to think bigger than just I'm teaching 16th notes or I'm teaching two-part harmony. We have to think, what is the bigger idea here? And the way that we start to do that and make sure our repertoire will allow us those connections to bigger ideas and bigger themes is that we look for the story in the song, because our brains are already primed for stories, which means that stories already are going to provide that connection. In fact, for, I don't know, since the beginning of when man could talk, right? We were passing down stories as ways of communication, as ways of keeping history, as ways of keeping information, right? So your brain is already primed for stories. And we think about it that way when we're selecting our repertoire. We choose the repertoire a little bit differently, right? Instead of, I need this because we're going to be learning about, we need to be able to perform in four-part harmony. We're picking this piece because I see how the story is going to provide connection for my students. Doesn't mean we don't teach the concepts and skills, right? Because we're still music teachers after all, but we don't want to think so small. We got to think big, which means we have to think big about the repertoire. So when we're thinking about how do we find the story, we got to think about, well, what does a story have? A story has a who, what, when, where, why, and how to it, right? And so when we're thinking about, well, where do we need to know about this? At a minimum, you need to know who created the piece of music, what was it created for, why was it created, like when was the time period, where, because the location of where a piece was created is going to have an effect on it. And then how, what's the manner of which this piece is performed, the manner in which it was created. So I want to use an example as we're thinking through these three main points. And I think probably an example that whether you're a music teacher, an arts teacher, or an instructional leader who just supports their fine arts team, probably everybody knows the song Hot Cross Buns. And those of you that are watching me live, let me know in the comments if you know that piece, Hot Cross Buns. I have a feeling you probably do, but if I don't, please correct me for having that assumption. So let's think Hot Cross Buns. Probably not a super culturally diverse piece, right? I don't think anyone is going to immediately think of Hot Cross Buns when they think of a diverse piece of music, but here we're thinking about the story. And I can make just about anything culturally responsive when I think through this framework that I'm going to share with you tonight, right? So if I'm thinking through the culturally responsive lens, I'm finding the story. Well, what's the story of hot cross buns? And if you're with me live, hey, drop in the comments, what even is hot cross buns? What kind of song is it? That's going to help us to figure out and find the story in it. So I'll just tell you. So hot cross buns is a folk song. And then more specifically, the classification of it is a street cry. And the location is, as far as we know, is from England. Folk song being a song of the people, just a song from folks. There's no particular composer that it's attributed to. It's just something that has come about over time. And then England being the place, and then a street cry is like the specific kind of classification. Well, what even is a street cry? Well, a street cry is the old way that people advertise their products and their services. So that's the purpose of why this song came about, because somebody needed to sell some hot cross buns, and they maybe were on the street literally crying out, hot cross buns, 1 a penny, 2 a penny, I got hot cross buns, right? And so now we know a little bit more about the story of the song when we think about it through the who, what, when, where, why, and the how of that piece, right? Now, specifically when we're thinking about hot cross buns and the story behind it, I guess if we are not thinking about the story behind it, I don't know that it's a very easy sell for kids to be super excited in a lot of the reasons why we often teach hot cross buns, right? It's an easy beginner tune. As a music teacher, I chose it often because maybe I was teaching recorder and we needed to learn BAG and proper hand position and fingering for stepwise phrases. Maybe you are a vocal teacher, a choir director. Hot cross buns is a super easy piece to do, 2-part easy harmony because it's only 3 pitches and it just has a 1 and a 5 accompaniment, right? Tonic dominant, right? Super easy. It's hard though for kids who are not already like super bought into those concepts. And most kids are not like diehard. Let me learn BAG on the recorder, right? Let me learn harmony, right? Most of our kids are not already there yet. So those concepts don't matter to them. That's what I mean by we can't think small. Concept elements are small thinking. We got to think big. What kids probably are thinking about and what's going to pique their interest and their curiosity is the marketing piece. Because again, the story here is a story that likely they've had experience with. Have you ever been somewhere where somebody was walking up and down maybe the bleachers crying out what they had? Well, if you've ever been to like outdoor baseball game or a football game, you've probably seen vendors calling out, got ice cold water, $1, that kind of thing, right? That's also a street cry. We don't call them necessarily street cries today in 2024. We often call this kind of category of song a jingle. And that's actually a whole career, right? Whole marketing campaigns, the jingle, the song, the earworm that gets into people's minds psychologically is how they sell their services and products, how they stay top of mind. Now I've brought something to the story of hot cross buns that's a little more interesting than we got to learn this for BAG or we're learning this to sight read stepwise melodies and major tonality, right? Like now we're a little bit more interesting. That's what I mean by we have to find the story in the song because students' brains are primed for the story already. And when we start talking about it in terms of things they've already experienced through their own cultural frames of reference, which I should probably define that. Cultural frames of reference include your prior experiences, your knowledge, your interests, but also the various parts of your identity and also the intersections of your various identities, right? Because no one is one thing. I'm not just Black, I'm also a Black woman and so on and so forth, right? So when I say cultural frame of reference, that's what I mean. It's not just race and ethnicity. We often get that confused. So many of our students have some sort of experience with somebody on the sidewalk calling out about their services or their product that they have, or some experience at a event or a game or something, right? Many of our students do. And this is where in last week's session 2, the piece about really understanding your learners comes important because maybe your students, they're not in a life experience place, that's a thing, where they go to sports events or they would have it, right? So then you have to find something else about hot cross buns and the story to be the connection point for them. So I'm kind of using an example that I think is probably going to be wide encompassing, but the caveat is you still have to know your learners. If your students are like, what do you mean walking up and down the bleachers, calling out, and they have no life experience, then this is not going to be the point in the story that will be helpful. You'll have to find something else. So the first part here is you have to find the story. How can I pull out the story and start connecting it to the frames of reference that my students already have? And those of you that are just hopping in, so tonight is the third session of the 4-part series, making culturally responsive music teaching the norm and not the exception. And tonight we're getting into selecting repertoire through a culturally responsive lens, getting out of this misconception that culturally responsive music teaching looks like diversity and diverse repertoire. That's actually not it, right? So how do we instead use a culturally responsive lens when we're selecting repertoire that will later position our instruction for increasing the capacity of learning of our learners for higher order thinking, critical thinking skills, and things like that. So the first part of this like framework in a framework is you have to find the story in the song. And so for Hot Cross Buns, we got to know the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And then what in there is going to be most connecting for our students, right? For many people, many kids, maybe even you, me talking about going to a baseball game or going to a football game or any kind of event where you have vendors. Once I was in New Orleans, actually, and we joined a second line, because apparently you can just join the second line parade. That was so much fun. But I remember very explicitly, as we were going all through New Orleans, just on the second line, there were vendors walking with the second line. It was kind of like a parade, walking with the second line, and also people like on the sidewalk as we were walking by with like coolers of water. They were calling out ice cold water, $1 for water. I remember people were selling food, like that kind of thing, right? So think about for your kids, where would they have had experience with somebody selling their product and service in some way like that? That's going to be a connecting part in the story where now their interest is piqued and now they have a frame of reference for this piece. So the first part is we got to find the story in the song. But then after we find the story in the song, now we have to find the points of relevance of that piece of music. Again, the element, the concept of, reading, sight reading in major tonality or playing BAG on the recorder, that is not relevant for our students. Quite frankly, they don't care, at least not yet, and at least not for the majority of kids. Now, of course, there's going to be the small group of kids who are diehard sight readers, diehard recorder players. But remember, culturally responsive teaching is increasing the learning capacity for all of our learners. So we have to focus on what is going to be most engaging and relevant for everybody and not just a small group. So we can't think small with the elements and concepts. We have to think big about the bigger idea. What is the big idea of Hot Cross Buns? What's the big connection, the relevance? It's marketing, right? Hot Cross Buns fundamentally is a jingle. We call it jingles now. A whole career. People are professional jingle writers as part of marketing campaigns for, I bet if I were to sing, well, you probably know this little jingle. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. I'm loving it, right? McDonald's, everybody in the world probably knows that. I bet you and your students do, even though that jingle was from like the early 2000s, right? And so that's essentially what Hot Cross Buns is in the category of it, right? Simple melody that is promoting a product and a service. Do you think your students have experience with promotions, marketing for products and services? Of course they do, right? If I were to go into my email inbox right now, I bet since the last time I checked it a few hours ago, I already have a whole bunch of emails marketing products and services to me. Probably you do as well, right? I'm on like text lists. So I even get text messages reminding me of different promotions and things going on. And even our young learners have experiences with marketing on a daily basis. When they're watching television, when they're on apps and their phones, there's products and products and services being promoted. When they are walking in a store, there's products and promotions, right? When they're on social media, there's products and promotions everywhere. We all have experience with marketing. Now we have a way to make it relevant, right? So then you have to know your learners, right? What are some questions that you can start asking to get the conversation going, to get those bridges from the unknown thing, the Hot Cross Buns, and whatever the concepts that you're going to teach, to something that they already, or from the things they already know, to the unknown thing, the Hot Cross Buns, the concepts and the elements. Well, what kind of products and services do you buy? What kind of ads do you see? What kind of jingles do you hear? I used to play a little like a kind of like a warm up game for my hey Aaron for my students when I would start this unit for them. When I had like a whole YouTube playlist of all, I probably still have it somewhere, but a whole YouTube playlist of just like super popular jingles for different things. And we would just play a game where I would play it for them. I wouldn't show them the video. I play them each one, and they would like call out the service, right? So the McDonald's one, the I don't know, whatever ones I can't think of right now, but all the different jingles. They would call it out, right? How can I hook them into the learning? How can we make it relevant for the students? Again, this is why it's really important that you actually know who your learners are at a deeper level. So it's that understanding piece. And if you didn't watch session 2, go back, because I went really deep. It was really good. I went really deep into the process of the levels of culture that I work with teachers around to understand how we get past just, I know my learners, to I understand who they are. Because this relevance piece is going to be different for every school community and for even every class, right? Because it depends upon what kind of experiences have your learners had. So what's going to be interesting for them? Is it going to be interesting to talk about jingles? Will be interesting to talk about social media ads, right? So you have to kind of find that relevancy piece. Okay, those of you that are just jumping in, tonight is third session of my 4-part series, Making Culturally Responsive Music Teaching the Norm and Not the Exception. And so tonight we're getting into selecting repertoire through a culturally responsive lens, not just diverse repertoire, because diversity does not help our students learn better. It's the learning capacity, right, that we're trying to build. And so I'm breaking down my framework in the framework of how do we select repertoire through that lens, right? So first we have to find the story in that piece of music. Then we have to make it relevant for them. And then finally, we have to look for what are the explicit, culturally relevant pedagogical connections. This is where I find music teachers falter a little bit. Part of it is just not knowing what the main principles of culturally relevant pedagogy are. And then the other part is because we just love music. So we pick music that we love, that we're excited about, and we just think that our kids are going to be excited about it too. I often fell into that trap early in my career where I would just love this piece of music so much, and I wanted so much for my students to love it as much as I did. And so sometimes I held on to the ego of that, right, more than I really was paying attention to. But does this piece really have relevant pedagogical connections for my students? Ultimately, that's the piece that we need, because that's going to be what grows their capacity for learning, right? Hi, Angelica, thanks for coming in. And so this third piece is we have to explicitly know what the culturally relevant principles are, and explicitly know how are we going to connect to those principles as we are engaging in the full artistic process. And if you do this piece right, when you get to the curriculum writing part, when you write that amazing unit plan, when you develop that concert program, you've already done a lot of the work, because you basically already have your objectives for what you're going to do with that piece of music, and you're covering the artistic process and the culturally relevant principles. So let me get a little further into that. So like I mentioned earlier, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. Hey, Angelica, good evening to you also. Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings is the originator of the theory of culturally relevant pedagogy. If you're not familiar with Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings or the theory of culturally relevant pedagogy, get on Google and Google that, because that's important. But basically what Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings found was that there's 3 things that need to be happening in a culturally relevant instructional program, right? So first, there is high student learning or academic achievement. It's not woo-woo teaching. There's standards-based. It's assessed, right? It's still clear outcomes that we are driving towards. It's not just vibes and good feelings. We still have clear standards that we are unpacking and that we are teaching in our units of study. The second thing was cultural proficiency. And when I've heard Dr. Ladson-Billings talk about this, I've heard her say, we essentially want kids to be biculturally, even triculturally competent, meaning they are fluent in their own culture, so they understand themselves. They understand what are the values and beliefs of my culture, meaning my unique facets of identity and the intersections of those identities. Like, what is my culture? Who am I? They also are skillful in at least one other culture, meaning that they understand the cultural norms of another culture, and they are skillful in being able to navigate those cultural norms with other people. Often we see these in kids who are very chatty with like the kids who are like chatty with everybody. It doesn't matter who you sit them next to. They're just going to be chatty. I realized what I'm trying to think of like what maybe it was like a sixth grade class. I realized as I was trying to think of like, okay, what's the asset that I see in this child that everywhere I move them to, they're talking to everybody. I was like, you know what? They are really good at kind of switching between the cultural norms. They're able to talk to really everybody. And I think it's because they're just proficient in knowing how to navigate just difference of language and difference of communication. Like this child is actually really culturally proficient. That's what I'm seeing. That's the asset in them talking to everybody all the time. And so that's how we kind of see it, right? But essentially, that's what it is. We want them to be biculturally competent, quad culturally competent. Really, we want them to be skillful in navigating respectfully the differences that different cultural norms will bring when you're in diverse groups of people. Of course, one person is not diverse, but when you have multiple people and you have diverse cultures and things, there's going to be conflict. So how can you navigate that in a way that still honors people's differences, but also allows for everybody to have equitable outcomes? That's really what cultural proficiency is. So we got to teach that to our young people so that when they become adults, they are culturally proficient and they're making decisions from a culturally proficient lens, right? So she found it was the higher academic outcomes. The teachers were teaching explicit cultural proficiency objectives. And then the third really important part, and this is the one that I find that people are the most hesitant to do, but this is the thing that separates culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy from diversity education and multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is often when I meet with music teachers often and they explain to me what they're doing. Oh yeah, Ashley, I'm being very culturally responsive. I have all these different genres, and they're describing multicultural education to me. They're not describing culturally responsive or relevant pedagogy because there is no social political consciousness. And that's the third part of the theory of culturally relevant pedagogy. There has to be social political consciousness that's being developed. You can also think of this as the so what. When I was thinking of developing curriculum, when I do develop curriculum for the partnerships that I work with, I think of like, so what? So what would make this child want to learn this, or the children? So what is this going to matter in their life? The so what piece is how students understand the world around them. Our world has power dynamics. It has equity and inequity. It has issues of diversity. It has issues of inclusion, ability, disability, people who have the ability to influence and people who don't have the ability to influence, right? All these social political things. Often when people hear the word social political, they get scared and they think of the heavy parts of it. They think of race, gender expression, and those things are things that we need to be helping our learners to understand and navigate. But also social political consciousness also is, why is it that our school district calendar has days off for certain holidays and certain faiths and religions, but not for others? That's also an issue of social political nature, right? And so sometimes I feel like people get scared of this part and then they shy away, and then you're not doing culturally responsive teaching, you're doing multicultural teaching, which is its own thing, right? No shade, but if we're going to call it culturally responsive teaching, then do culturally responsive teaching, which means you cannot shy away from the social political piece. And so when you're thinking about the pedagogical connections, we think about those three main things, and we're artists, right? So we also have to consider the artistic process. So the artistic process is, how do we connect to the music? How do we respond to it? So let me break that down. So connecting, because I know we have instructional leaders on the call, so let me be clear. So connecting to music is things like, actually it's things like what I was just explaining earlier. So finding the story, finding the relevance. How will somebody connect to this? By understanding who created the music, why, where, when, the who, what, when, where, why, how, all that. Connecting to the music, understanding it, history, background, and things like that. Responding to music, that part of the artistic process is referring to the like the emotional nature of it. Like how does the music elicit a response in you? So that might be the speed of the music, the dynamics or the volume or the music. That might be how smooth it is or how bumpy. That might be also the timbre of the instrumentation and things like that. So like, what is literally like your response to this music. And then we also need to talk about performing music. That's the easy one for music teachers, right? We've got to perform all the time. Often when I look at curricula, it's heavy on the performance stand, especially for ensembles, because that's what you're doing, right? Sometimes we forget about the equally important nature of connecting and responding as a part of the artistic process. And then the final part is the creation. So creating new work, but also not necessarily creating a whole brand new choir piece, but what's your interpretation of this choir piece, right? How are we going to tell the story of this piece of music through our play around with dynamics, articulation, tempo, maybe a different harmony here, right? That's also creating when you're kind of arranging or putting your own spin on it as well. So when we're considering the pedagogical connections of our repertoire, we have to consider the pedagogical connections through culturally relevant pedagogy, right? The clear objectives for student learning and assessment, right? Don't forget the assessment piece. Also, how do you know that they learn what you taught them? The clear objectives for cultural proficiency. So what are you going to do to advance your students' ability to be biculturally competent, triculturally competent, quad culturally competent? Why not? And then what are the specific objectives for social political consciousness? Again, doesn't need to always be the heavy topics like race and gender. It can also be questioning, well, why is it that some people get to decide the laws in our country and other people never really seem to get to have their say? That's an issue of social political consciousness as well, the advocacy piece, right? So how do we have explicit objectives for that? And how will this piece of music help me to do that? Help me to make all three of those connections? And then while we're going through the artistic process, right, connecting, responding, performing, creating, how are my students going to do all those things? Because again, we're not just teaching the music, the notes on the page, the fingerings. It's who are our students becoming because they are engaging in this process of high academic outcomes, growing their learning capacity for higher order thinking skills, creative and critical thinking, innovation. How are we growing their learning capacity to understanding of power dynamics through our social political conversation about this piece? How are we helping them to respond, to perform it, to create with it, right? So this is way more multifaceted than we're learning hot cross buns because we need sight read and do major, or we need to learn a recorder piece. It's so much more multifaceted than that. So those of you that are just jumping on, I'm breaking down my framework for how do you select repertoire through a culturally responsive lens. That's our third session of our 4-part series this month. And the first part of the framework I shared was you have to first find the story, right, in the song. Then you got to find the relevance, and now we have to make the pedagogical connection. So I've been using hot cross buns as an example because I find that nobody thinks hot cross buns is culturally diverse, right? But my point is I can make really anything culturally responsive when I use this framework. I can make Beethoven culturally responsive when I use this framework and when I understand my students, right? I can make just about anything culturally responsive. And so with hot cross buns, the story here is that it's an English street cry. Today we call those jingles, right? And so we have a way in for our students who have experienced seeing people call out at a baseball game. I got ice cold water, right? We make it relevant for them through the story. And now we think about, well, how can marketing play a role here? How can I engage my students in the artistic process and explore marketing at the same time? Well, let's have a conversation about jingles, because that's, first of all, that's a career. People make a lot of money making jingles for these big advertising campaigns, right? So first of all, let's talk about the marketing piece, but let's also talk about the social political part there as well, right? Because some people have influence over the marketing campaigns that we see that are huge have a really big impact on our culture as a society, right? Who gets to be a part of these big campaigns and who doesn't? How do these big campaigns shift the way we think about things? Right? I think about like Beyonce. Beyonce changed, what was it, the year that she dropped that album? Like she's like released it on iTunes one night, right? What year was that? I forget what album. If you know, let me know in the comments. I'm forgetting what album. Beyonce just changed the whole way that people announce, right? Because she didn't do a whole pre-launch and all these things. She just dropped it in the middle of the night, right? Like who gets to make these decisions and who doesn't? That's an issue of social political consciousness. Well, can we learn some different jingles to explore how they're used in marketing campaigns. While we're learning these jingles, can we talk about dynamics and tempo? Because if I'm trying to sell something, I'm not going to whisper hot cross buns. I'm going to shout hot cross buns. That's dynamics, right? And what kind of timbre am I going to use? What kind of articulation, right? Now we're getting into the performance part and the response, right? So we're engaging in the artistic process. We're connecting through the story. Well, let's study all these different jingles. Let's learn about them, learn about the campaigns that they were a part of. By the way, we need to learn how to play them. So now we have a reason for our skills and our concepts. That's how we get the skills and concepts in, right? We have a reason for it. And then also, how about we create our own jingle? Is there a product that we buy that we think we can make a really good jingle for, using the concepts and elements? You see where I'm going? Using those concepts and elements that we needed to learn to play hot cross buns. Can we write our own jingles? That is a way more interesting, higher order thinking kind of unit of study than just, let's learn some recorder pieces that have BAG. Let's sight read some melodic tunes that have mi, re, do in major chana or whatever, right? That's a way more multifaceted unit of study, which we'll talk about actually next week, because it, first of all, hits the full artistic process and has all the pedagogical connections for culturally relevant pedagogy. And now that I looked at my piece this way, and I've seen the connections that I can make with it, first of all, I know it's going to be a rich, robust, meaty piece, which will be a great material for my unit plan. But then additionally, I've done a lot of the work. Basically, I know probably most of the objectives that I'm going to be teaching, because maybe hot cross buns is one of 5 pieces that my students will be learning, 5 jingles, right? The materials that we'll be learning. But those same objectives will probably be true for the other jingles that I find as well, right? And so that's way more robust than just a piece, a Latin American piece, or a piece from Ghana, or right. That the diversity doesn't lead us to what I just explained. I see a couple of people jumping in tonight in our 3rd session. I'm breaking down my framework for how do you select repertoire through a culturally responsive lens. It's not about the diversity. It's about finding the story in the song. We went over that first. How do you pull that out? How do you find the relevance for your learners, right? What's their connection to that story going to be? And then finally, pedagogically, how do we connect to the principles of culturally relevant pedagogy while also engaging in the full artistic process? So that's what I have for you tonight. That was the breakdown of my framework for how do we have this rich, meaty material that will help us when we get to the curriculum piece, that instructional planning piece, writing that unit plan, writing that lesson plan. Now we have materials that are already positioned for this kind of culturally responsive teaching and learning. So let me know. I love for this to be a conversation, because I'm just on here live talking and sharing. Let me know if you have any other thoughts about that, or what thoughts that spurns for you. Angelica, I see, did you request to be in the video? I've never done this, but let me see on Instagram. If I click on you, I would love to hear what you have to say. So let me know. I've never done this before, so we'll see. YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn friends over on, I'm also on Instagram. So I'm going to see if Angelica is still there. And if you want to join me, that would be awesome. I haven't done that before. But anyway, but while I'm stopped here, let me know again, what questions did any of that kind of spurn for you? I would love to know, does that alter the way you think about selecting repertoire as you're considering, how do I move my instructional practice to be more, to not be more, to center culturally responsive, equitable instructional pathways for our learners? So I'd love to know what questions and thoughts that you have about that. Let me see. Angelica, I'm going to try again. And if you're not like decent, that's okay too. I haven't actually done this before, so I don't know if you can see that I'm clicking on that. Yeah, so let me know what questions you have. I'll hang on for just another few minutes. While you're putting your questions in the chat. Oh, that's okay, Angelica. Let me know if you have any questions, though. I'm so grateful that you're here. Thank you. Thank you for engaging in the comments. Anyway, so while you're putting your questions in the chat, let me share a little bit about how to work with me. And so I shared earlier that my consulting firm, A. Cuthbertson Consulting, we partner with schools, districts, organizations nationwide. to support their music and also arts teams. So some of the folks that I work with, it's just a music team, but actually more often it's now whole fine arts teams because as you probably can tell, many of these ideas that I'm sharing with you aren't only specific to music. They also are quite applicable to the other arts areas as well. And so more and more I'm getting requests for, can you work with our whole fine arts staff on this, which I love. This helps to stretch my thinking even more and gets me excited about the growth of my team, which I'm starting to think about that next level for us. Anyway, so I work with folks all over the country to help their music and arts educators implement culturally responsive teaching so that they can better connect with their learners and create more engaging, high quality instruction that promotes this learner capacity, but also really prepares students for the skills that they need outside of the music classroom, and also helps you as a teacher develop the skills you need, the adaptive skills, to be able to keep up with the diverse and ever-evolving needs of our learners. This is not a fad. This is just good teaching. So how can you have adaptive skills that you can transfer to different kinds of learners that you have to make sure everybody gets, equitable access to this rigor in their music instruction? We're not just singing songs and playing instruments, right? We are really helping to grow our learners in a way that allows them to still be creative and express themselves and gain these really important skills for their life that is unique to what we do in the arts when we're teaching this way. If you're just teaching BAG, then that's not what I'm talking about, right? And so here's how to work with me. And so we have services for teachers that are directed teachers, or if you're an individual music teacher looking for support. And then we also have our services for our partnerships. So I'll just kind of briefly share about that while you're putting your questions in the chat. So for teachers, there's 2 ways to work with me. First, we have our course, which I'm super excited about. I just launched the digital version of our course. So I've been doing it with live cohorts of teachers online. And the thing about online, it's great because I can interact in real time and the teachers can get feedback right away. But then, of course, there's always the issue of time. And we were doing whole day trainings on the weekend, so that can be difficult. So I'm super excited that after enough cycles that I feel really good about recording everything, this summer I'm recording the whole digital course. And so folks that have already jumped in are getting if I can say so myself, a really, really good deal, because when I did it live, it was over $1,000, almost $2,000 to be in the course. And right now it's only $375, but it's only going to last until the end of the month. I am going to close enrollment July 31st, which is a week from today. So if you want to get in at that low price, get in now, because I'm going to close it, because basically it's the Mac Daddy, I like to call it. So it is basically 4 courses in one, because it's the entire framework. It's 12 modules. Right now, it's looking like it's going to be well over 100 lessons. Because of course, every module has one of the modules I just finished doing, it was like 12 lessons in it, right? And so much deeper than what I'm getting into on these live sessions. And so next week, I'm going to close the enrollment for the Mac Daddy, because people who are getting in, I'm real time uploading the things every week. But what is going to happen is each individual course I will release. And so if you want access to the full thing, you don't want to wait, because probably the 4th course won't be released to the public until early next year. But if you know, hey, I want this curriculum and instructional part now, get in now. The price will never be this low to be able to access the whole thing. I'm rewarding people that take action quickly and are also willing to kind of be with me on this this journey as I upload a whole digital course. And so if you're a teacher, you can pay for yourself. I also take purchase orders. So talk to your principal about their professional development funds. If that's something that you are interested in doing. If you're a public school teacher, your school has professional development funds, and we do that all the time. So that's one way to work with you. The other way to work with me is in one of my instructional coaching packages, one-on-one. And so I usually take a limited number of one-on-one instructional coaching clients, just because of my capacity with my other responsibilities. I'm actually going to get ready to open for the fall. Probably, I haven't quite decided if it'll be next week or the week after, but very soon I will be opening for that. But if you already know that you're interested in working with me one-on-one to really give you personalized support, hop into my DMs right now and let's have a conversation about what that would look like. And I'll make sure that you get on my calendar first. I really don't have capacity for more than maybe like 5 or so teachers usually every year. But I love the one-on-one coaching. And so I'm looking to be able to support some folks. So let me know if you already know you're interested in that. Just hop into my DMs. If you're on the email list, reply to any of those emails. It's me reading those emails. And let's get a conversation going. So let's find 2 options for teachers. And then for instructional leaders, if you're a principal, if you're a assistant principal who supports their fine arts team at your school, if you're a fine arts supervisor, if you're an assistant superintendent of instruction, here's what I have for you. So everything is rooted in the framework that we are talking about in this series. So regardless if I'm doing a curriculum development project, group coaching, professional development workshop series, advisory, so everything goes back to the same framework. Everything is the same ideas, but I have 4 services. So it could look like curriculum development services, which are audits, advisement, and done for you curriculum. So if you want someone who is skillful in developing arts curriculum through a culturally responsive and equitable, inclusive lens, that would be a great service. I take a handful of those each year because they just require more touch points, right? But I love the curriculum development piece. And so if you're interested in that, jump in the DMs, or on my website, there's places to book a call. So book a call, or let me know you need the link and I'll send you the book a call link. And let's talk about it. I'm booking now for the fall. And so let's talk about it. So that's curriculum development. Then we have our advisory services. So sometimes it's not a curriculum project you need. It's not coaching. It's not professional development. It's like, hey, we've got a situation happening. We just need somebody who's an expert in the arts and equity to help guide our music and arts teachers through this situation. Or maybe you got some policies going on. That's something that I support with as well as strategic planning and program evaluation. Then we have our instructional coaching packages, which same as I said for teachers, if you're a principal and you have a teacher that you think this would benefit, you can purchase a one-on-one package for your teacher. I also do group coaching. So if you have like a small group of fine arts teachers that want to do this work, we have our small group packages as well. And then of course, our most popular thing that I do most of the time, of course, is our professional learning packages, which are workshop series. We have 4 workshop series. One on building the lens for the mindset for equity, the affirming learning environment, what we talked about tonight, how do you use a culturally responsive lens to select repertoire, and then our curriculum and instructional series. So any of those, depending upon what your needs are, we can talk about what that would look like. And then I should also say, and am I speaking right? So I also am available to do keynotes, and if you're an event organizer, conference breakouts, and things like that. So let me know what it is that would be helpful for you. On my website, everything I just said, all that information is there. We also have our services guide is there that details all of the information, also has pricing and things like that. But if you just want to have a conversation about what it is that I could do to support your team, how can I bring value to your folks, just send me a DM and we can set it up. I will say the next couple of weeks, I'm in the middle of a very exciting projects that some of you, I think, probably know what I'm talking about. Others, if you're new, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm not going to announce it yet, but it's like we're getting very close. So my availability for meetings is going to be just a little bit more limited the next couple of weeks because I just need to have like head down focused work time. But if you hop into my DMs and let me know you're interested, I'll make sure I just find a time for you. But if you wait, if you're waiting until next week to even tell me you want to call, it's probably going to be the next week after because I've got to just get this going because we got to make sure we meet this next deadline. So that's what I have for you. I don't see any questions. So let me know. And if you're feeling shy and want to send me your question in a DM or an email, that's fine as well. I would love to chat with you. I chat all the time. Sometimes people don't want to put their question in the comments. That's fine. And then let me know, how can I support you? If you're a music teacher, how can I support you? Are you interested in the course? Again, I'm closing the Mac Daddy next Wednesday, but then the individual courses will be available. I'm also available for coaching. If you're an instructional leader, are you looking for PD for your folks? Are you looking for curriculum development support? Are you looking for advisory services? Are you looking for coaching? Let me know how I can support you. That's what I do. I'm excited for the new year and some new partnerships. So yeah, let me know how I can help. And make sure you share this with a friend. This is essentially free PD that I'm just coming on and doing. I'm not sure how long I'm going to keep all the replays up. So share with a music teacher friend, share with an instructional leader friend, let them get in on this, share the video with them, let them know where they can find it. And then come join me next week for our fourth and final session next week, we're going to get into really putting all this together. So how do we design real world curriculum and instruction for variability will be our fourth and final session. I cannot wait to see you there. Don't forget to let me know how I can help. Don't forget to share with a friend, and I'll see you next week.